Shout out to Just Calm Up for the title sequence, since this story doesn't actually have one, and welcome to my review of 69 Yards. This episode is widely considered to be the best episode of the new series so far, with Russell T Davies himself proclaiming that this is one of the greatest things he's ever written. Considering that he's responsible for so many great things in Doctor Who, that is an extremely high bar to set. And also, considering the quality of the stories he's given in this series so far, are we meant to believe this? Does this episode live up to it? Is it as good as everyone makes out? Or is it like Boom? An episode that, on the surface, is pretty good, but if you think about it for more than half a second, it completely falls apart. Well, let's find out then. Because I personally think that this episode is... So we start off with the Doctor and Ruby landing in modern day Wales.
Oh yes! We are in Wales!
The happiest anyone has ever been to go to Wales. So the Doctor steps on the plot right after doing it the episode before, lol, and then he suddenly disappears after we get some setup about Mad Jack. Immediately, this episode has set up the creepy tone and tense feeling of unease extremely effectively by having such a sudden music change and tension rise when the Doctor just disappears, seemingly without explanation as of yet. This has been some great stuff so far, and I think the lack of a title sequence also really helps this for building up the story, as it immediately tells us right off the bat, in a subtle way, that this isn't going to be a standard episode of Doctor Who, and is actually going to be taking a different approach to the show's standard storytelling. But in a good way for once, unlike the first 3 episodes I reviewed. We then get another boost of mystery and tension as we see this woman from a distance, 69 yards to be specific, doing these strange hand motions and just staring at Ruby, and I like how right from the bat, the story shows us that she's always a distance away. As we see, after Ruby steps forward, the woman has also moved back, but we never actually see her move, which immediately tells us that there's something seriously wrong with this entity, especially since she's always accompanied by these creepy whispers. However, one complaint I have about this story right off the bat, which isn't really much of a critique of the story itself, but more so the series itself, and that's how this is only episode 4, technically 5 of the series, and we're already having a Doctor Light story. Now, I'm well aware that Ncuti Gatwa wasn't available for filming because he had to finish Sex Education, which is fine, but that then begs the question of why not delay the series by a bit so you could have included him in more stories. But then that just goes back around full circle to the massive glaring issue that this series only has 8 episodes, which just very clearly isn't enough for Doctor Who. If this series had 10 episodes instead of 8, this wouldn't be as much of an issue, but having the Doctor completely out of the story before he's even got a fully established character is very damaging to the series overall. Also, considering in the 3 series of Doctor Who that actually have Doctor Light episodes, the episode is always after episode 10, so we've had plenty of time to grow and love with the Doctor, fall in love with the character, see his dynamic with his companion before we lose him for an episode. I don't know, I just think this is way too early for this to be in the series, especially since the characterization has been so poor. But that's not really an issue with this story itself. Yet. It's, again, yet another detriment to the first 3 stories, and just goes to show how poorly they did at writing the 15th Doctor as a character. Excluding Boom though. Because as bad as it is, at least the 15th Doctor is a character, even if he's a stupid one. The 12th Doctor... Anyway, so we get more tension building scenes of Ruby being followed by the woman before we get another Susan Twist cameo. These appearances do absolutely nothing on retrospect since we all know what the eventual reveal is, and how insanely stupid it is. But this scene itself still works very effectively for this story, if you ignore the stupid connotations attached to it. But considering the stupid connotations attached to it don't really affect the story itself, her inclusion doesn't detract too much. And like I said, this scene is another which is great for building the mystery of the story, because after Ruby asks her to talk to the woman, we see what effect she has on other people. making them hate Ruby and run away from her, which works really brilliantly for this story and Ruby's character for a few reasons that I'll touch on later. But for now, this is just a great scene for building mystery that catapults the interest for this story even higher than it already was. So Ruby walks into a pub with the most judgmental people on planet Earth for some reason. The UK would never. And this scene is one that, with retrospect and even on its own merit, is just kind of strange. And honestly, ultimately, it's a waste of time. Especially considering many other things in this story that really could have used that time. While it is admittedly quite funny that everyone is just so unnecessarily rude to Ruby, this scene, when it's all said and done, is just these people fucking around with her for 8 minutes straight without really adding anything to the narrative. And it's really annoying for a reason that I will get to much later, so bear with me. While it adds a good scene reaffirming what the woman does to people, even though we literally just seen it 5 minutes ago, this twist of the story they're telling not actually meaning anything is just like, seriously? That's it? They were just all in on the joke and decided to torment this clearly stranded young lass for no reason because...
I don't know.
Don't get me wrong, I get fucking with people, trust me, I'm an expert. But why spend a whole scene setting up a mystery of Mad Jack that Russell clearly knew sounded interesting because he put it in the Next Time trailer, only to have it ultimately be undermined and just have it mean nothing? It has nothing to do with anything else in the story, even though the name Mad Jack is brought up again, even though the character who uses it is established in the beginning by the Doctor, and also has no correlation to the story being told. But then, why do they act as if there is meant to be a connection between them? Even though this episode has been great up to this point, this entire scene on first and repeat watches is just a waste of what could have potentially been an interesting plot for this episode. It also doubles the pain how well directed this scene is, with the second episode in a row now to effectively use close-ups without them being awkward, and they're actually used to amplify the horror. But nah, didn't matter, mate. Made it up, mate. I guess this really was just a trailer bait scene. How utterly slothful, you hyperactive shoe.
It's racist, my dear, to be blunt.
I think I speak for everyone here when I say, huh?
So Ruby goes back to the TARDIS in quite an effective scene showing the passage of time and her waiting for the Doctor, before we cut back to her at the pub when she's very cruelly kicked out because of what the woman's caused to happen to Josh. While I think the further reaffirming of what the woman does was built up in an unnecessary scene, this does play into the episode's theme of abandonment very well, and quite effectively given how cold this woman is to Ruby, without even properly questioning her, and seeming scared herself to even go up to the woman and ask her. It does keep up the intrigue for the story expertly, and further the threat factor of this woman, and what she does, considering that in her short appearances so far, she's already started to ruin Ruby's life. So Ruby goes back to the TARDIS again and she gives her farewell to the Doctor before leaving to go back home. Unfortunately though, this scene is another which is just very weightless, and the impact of it isn't really felt because of the Doctor and Ruby's relationship. Because of their lack of character in their first 3 appearances not selling us on the connection between these two at all, her making this huge decision to leave the TARDIS behind and wish that she could see him again, it just isn't impactful. Because I couldn't tell you for the life of me what these two get out of each other besides just messing around and being overly happy and not being integral to the plot and not really being characters themselves, just sort of being empty vessels who follow around the awful plots. Even factoring Boom into the equation, I don't get what these two get out of travelling with each other. And unfortunately, as much as Ruby was just acting like the worst companion pre-Chibnall era but nowhere near as pretentious and insufferable, and can actually act with bad material, none of the personality from Boom has carried over, And with the Doctor acting no different at the start of the story either, I just don't buy that her leaving the TARDIS like this would be a super impactful moment at all.
No, I was hardly with him, really.
Which is a huge shame and just shows off how much Russell has rushed this series.
I mean, it seems to me that this is a
perfect way to build up the Doctor and companion's relationship.
if you suck!
So after a really well done and brilliant transitional scene showing that the woman is still following Ruby, she arrives back home, and after an admittedly hilarious explanation from Carla on what the Doctor might be doing...
Maybe the Doctor went inside his box and that's what men do. They go into their sheds and they potter. They have train sets and hobbies and things women should never know about.
How the hell did you know that?
They try a social experiment on the woman by having Carla on the phone with Ruby while she tries to talk to her. This is gonna be a very low bar praise, but I'm actually very happy that this story does this as soon as it can, because it's such a simple yet logical plan which, at least from our and their perspective, should work perfectly. This is only noteworthy praise in this story because every episode up to this point has had such insane logical inconsistency and characters constantly making stupid decisions that it makes them agonizing to watch at points. But here, this actually feels like what two real people would come up with as a plan. This is the first Russell-penned episode this series which actually feels like a Russell script, with characters making in-line and logical decisions, and actions that don't contradict their personality or just common sense. Such a shame it ends up not mattering. I mean, ignore that. What did I mean by that? Don't you worry about it. But you should remember it, just in case. So after another super interesting Mrs. Flood moment, Carla goes up to the woman before running away and screaming, and this moment is really well done. Carla's robotic description of what she looks like is fascinating, really making the mind race at what she could possibly be and why she has this effect on people.
Mum, what does she look like?
She looks like what she looks like.
What does that mean?
She looks like what she is.
And Carla getting a taxi away from Ruby while coldly looking at her is such a sad moment for Ruby that it's near impossible to not feel sorry for her here, especially after her own mum kicked her out and refuses to let her back into her life. Let's not talk about how unintentionally funny this shot is though. And I really do like how, on a meta level, this is exploring Ruby's fear of abandonment. This alternate timeline she's found herself in has realized her biggest fear of being left behind. And from her point of view, being left behind for no reason, or a reason which she'll never find out about, which harkens back to one of the only things this character has going for her, which is that her mother abandoned her when she was born for, at least from her point of view, seemingly no reason. This has been seen with everything up to the story so far. The Doctor has disappeared for seemingly no reason. People who try to speak to the woman run away for her for seemingly no reason. It's cost her a living space for seemingly no reason. And now it's cost her her mum for seemingly no reason. Which then harkens all the way back to her biological mum leaving her, which at this point is for seemingly no reason. Let's not talk about the actual reason right now. And on the note of disappointment, I'd be lying if I said this scene worked as well as it should have, because even though the way Carla talks to Ruby is very cruel and effective for the tones and themes and all that, we've already seen the cold and distant Carla contrasted to her normal personality. You might not remember it because the episode was so shit, but we had this in her first appearance. Unless we forget, one of the biggest and most annoying issues with that scene was how long it fucking dragged on and on and on. 5 whole minutes of Cole's distant Carla, and this episode does it again, but nowhere near as impactful because we've fucking seen it before. You cannot rehash old ideas and story beats this early into a series. The unoriginality on display this series so far has been fucking criminal. Did you think we wouldn't notice?
You think I'm a fool?
Also, I literally just thought of this on the spot while I'm recording this audio, but literally, they did this with Jackie in Series 2, but that worked effectively because it was an alternate timeline, not alternate, it was an alternate universe Jackie, who was cruel to Rose, and also, we'd had like, what, a series and a half of Jackie at that point? So we actually knew her and actually cared, and it was more impactful. I literally, I shit you not, I will screenshot the script. I just thought of that on the spot. Holy shit, this series is so bad. Also, I'm fine with what the woman says to people being left ambiguous. It's one of the few things in the story that I don't think actually needs an explanation, as this being left up to interpretation brings out better ideas and sparks creativity in the mind more than anything that could be written for it really. But this then begs the question as to what Carla could have possibly said to convince Cherry to never let Ruby back in the flat again. Like, obviously we know that Carla has been turned against Ruby because of the woman, but Cherry never was. And she's clearly established to be outspoken of her own opinions and clearly loves Ruby and cares for her very much. What could Carla possibly say to her to convince her to never let in Ruby, or in fact, speak to her ever again? What? Never explained? Well, that's a running theme of this series, so I can't even really act surprised. And believe it or not, this story shows off this flaw the worst. So Ruby meets with Kate, and after more confirmation that the Doctor is completely missing, Ruby explains everything to her, and they hypothesize about what the woman could be, and they discuss some very interesting ideas. I can't wait for the eventual reveal on this. So UNIT try to take down the woman, and even despite their
full psychic training, we have telepathic dampeners, mesmeric shielding, and necklaces of silver and salt in case of witchcraft. Don't worry, you're with experts now.
yeah, all that, they still turn away from Ruby and leave her behind, which is such a heartbreaking thing to witness. Seeing Ruby completely lose all hope, as there's no one else who could possibly help her, and she might be stuck with this woman and a constant way of scaring everyone away from her forever. Hey look, it's the Doctor Who Companion of All Time shot. We then get a compilation of Ruby getting older and her relationship life falling apart. Real. As the woman distracts her too much from forming a proper connection with anyone, which is to be expected, and this little montage is very well done. And it shows that Ruby has been living with this for 20 years. We see her at 40 years old, and she looks like... oh my god. Oh my days. No, you can never show me this ever again. No, but like, no, I can't. I couldn't. No, what? What the actual fuck? No fucking way, man. No, that doesn't even make sense. No, I can't. I can't do it. No, I can't finish the review. Fuck, nah. No, can't be done. Alright, no, okay. I am a grown-ass man. I can't run away from these things forever. Okay. It's literally just a bit of fiction. It's not real. Alright, let's get back to it.
As a pizza delivery boy.
No, I can't do it. It doesn't even make sense. It's too much. It's actually too much.
It's too much!
It doesn't even make sense. No, okay, no, I'm gone. I can't do it. Fuck this. Jokes aside, it is a bit disappointing and incredibly lazy that they didn't even attempt to make Millie Gibson look any older than she already does. MILF Ruby is literally just Ruby with longer hair and glasses. And trust me, as a patented MILF expert, why the fuck did I write that? I believe there's more to looking older than just growing out your hair and wearing glasses. Because by that logic, I am 107 years old. So we finally see Roger Ap Gwilliam, who was set up in the very beginning of the story. And of course, because Russell thinks we're idiots, We have to get flashbacks to all of the past mentions of him in the story. Thank you. But believe it or not, I'm pretty sure most people can remember things that happened not even 30 minutes ago. And Ruby decides that the woman must be following her so that she could stop him from sending Britain into a nuclear war.
But you were right, it was never gonna work. And that is my fault. Except for the bed thing, because that really was you.
If anyone said this to me during a breakup, I would actually kill myself. Like, holy shit, poor mans. So Ruby goes to volunteer to hold coats, which is actually really funny.
I'll do leaflets, answering the phones, just tell me what to do and I'll do anything. Hey, I'll even carry the coats.
But then this scene presents a huge issue with this part of the story. And that's William himself. As we'll soon see, he gets elected as Prime Minister of the UK. Insert Harold Saxon joke here. And we're told about how he'll cause such huge devastation and such. But honestly, I do not believe for a second that this little twink boy is capable of that. Not even due just to his appearance and underconfident demeanor, but he's literally made out to look like a psychotic mug on live TV, likely in front of millions of people, but he still gets elected? I just don't buy that. Like, don't get me wrong, most politicians make fucking massive tits out of themselves on TV all of the time. Mr. Potato Head was still PM when this episode came out. But to the point where they get called out on the news? You really expect me to believe he'd get elected if he basically just admitted in front of the whole world that he just wants to fire off nuclear weapons? And also, this has got to be some of Russell's shittiest political writing maybe ever? It's so surface level and superficial and not saying anything biting or interesting that this character is just left as a shell of bad for Ruby to overcome, which really isn't that interesting. And honestly, it's really boring, especially compared to Russell's political writing in the 2000s. And I think part of the reason this feels so half-baked and lazy is that we don't see anything of this character until right now, and the first thing we properly see him do is basically just admit he wants to fire a nuclear missile on live TV. Dumbass. Like, we don't see any campaign rallies discussing his politics, or see how he ended up with such a massive following, or anything really. There was more build-up for the Master becoming Prime Minister than what's in this entire story. Like, if you ask these questions about Roger, I don't even know what anyone would say because we don't know shit about him.
I was going to vote for him.
Really?
Well, it was before I even met you, and I liked him.
Me too. Why do you say that? What was his policy? What did he stand for?
I don't know, he always sounded good.
Imagine if this was actually the Master brainwashing the population again, and this episode is like a premonition of what could happen. Honestly, I said that as a joke, but given how lazy Russell has been rehashing his old work this series, this would not shock me in the slightest. Oh, and in case you needed more confirmation that this wannabe genocidal fuckwit is evil, then he sexually assaults this poor volunteer. Yeah, we get it. He's meant to be awful. But all you've done here really is show that he's a sexual abuser and that he wants to fire big weapon. Delve more into what his positions are. What is this laziness? So Ruby finally gets confirmation that Roger is going to launch on Saturday. As if we fucking needed any more confirmation that he was evil.
I'm sorry it took so long. Because I think I'll only get one chance. And I had to make sure I was right. But I wish I could have helped you. I'm so sorry.
When the ending of this story comes around, I'll delve into why this line is so awful. But that's coming up soon, don't worry. So Ruby uses the woman to scare off Mad Jack William, and she's finally done what she set out to do. She found out what the point of the woman was. She's done what she was supposedly supposed to do from the start. So what now?
Can you leave me alone?
Oh, I guess the point of the woman is yet to be revealed. So a now 80-year-old still being followed Ruby visits the TARDIS in a very beautifully done scene, which links back to Wild Blue Yonder quite well, and she tells the TARDIS how everything in her life basically fell apart, but she still has hope, because that's very much like the Doctor. I don't want to reiterate this point too much because I already have in almost every single one of these reviews, and I likely still will have to in the other reviews to come, but this scene would have been a lot more impactful had the Doctor and Ruby's relationship been better defined.
Don't worry. Everyone has abandoned me my whole life.
Oh man, that's actually so sad. Now we need to go meta for a minute. Okay, so everything that I've praised throughout the video, every single point of praise and good writing about this episode that I've highlighted to you today, throw it away. Yeah, no, I'm serious, throw it away. Everything I've said this episode does well, ignore it. Neglect it. It doesn't even matter anymore, because all of it, every single last part of it, is completely undermined and fucking destroyed by this shitty ending. So the woman, after all of these years, finally approaches Ruby in a very well done and scary scene. And then she goes back in time with Ruby, and then we find out that Ruby was the woman, and she prevents the Doctor from stepping on the string, and then the woman disappears, and then the story ends. Back at the status quo. Are you fucking serious? So every single thing that we've seen in this story, good or bad, up to this point, doesn't even matter because it's not impactful to either of the characters, and Ruby doesn't even remember it. So not only is this stupid, irredeemable piece of shit galactic cunt bag of an ending the most unsatisfying thing to face the Earth, but for me, and hopefully you as well if you're not stupid, this shows this series' laziness at its worst. Because despite how awful that ending was, this episode could have been brilliant, but it's just been completely shat on by that, because it's left way too many questions unanswered for this to be a satisfying end to the story. It objectively has ruined everything in the episode up to this point, and that is a fucking crime, and the reason is so. In the easiest way to say it possible, you cannot spend a whole mystery story drip feeding us information and sprinkling hints and ideas to us throughout the entire runtime, only to undo it all and not explain anything. That, in and of itself, is unsatisfying as fuck and lazy, but it completely shows how this story just fundamentally doesn't understand what can make ambiguous mysteries in Doctor Who so interesting. We are given way too much information throughout this story for this ending to be satisfying. Like, we're told that the woman is Ruby, but then it just fucking ends. That doesn't answer the other 100,000 questions you've sprinkled throughout. Like, why did the Doctor disappear? Why was the woman 69 yards away? Why did she have a perception filter? Why did she make everyone hate Ruby? Why did this turn into a terrible political drama by the end? Why does all of the random shit this episode sets up for 40 fucking minutes even happen? We don't know, and we likely never will. It's pretty obvious that this story was going for a theme of, there's a reason behind everything, but we don't always know. Which doesn't work because of how butchered it is. Essentially, boiled down, this story is just, oh, shit happens, I don't know. Which is so fucking reductive and lazy compared to what this story could have been. I think the best episode to compare this one to is Midnight, because we never find out what the Midnight Entity is, but for that story to work, you don't need to know what it is, because the story is more so focused on the characters and what people become under pressure. This episode entirely revolves around the woman, and why is she doing this? But we never find out, and anything else in the story ultimately doesn't matter because it's an alternative timeline. Also, why does, like, old woman Ruby suddenly go back in time? That's not explained. If the woman is Ruby, then does her just going up to Ruby send her back in time? That doesn't make sense, and there is nothing to explain it. You can't excuse this shit. Also, Ruby will not be in this position in the real timeline, so Roger App will still launch nuclear weaponry, and this poor lass will still get sexually assaulted by him. What an awful thing to end up writing in a story due to your own incompetence, you fucking door. Essentially, the main reason this doesn't work and ruins the story is because it has to rely on your own interpretation for it to even work. There is nothing wrong with leaving stuff up to interpretation, like the Midnight Entity, the Woman in the End of Time, the Thing Under the Blanket and Listen, what the Doctor's fear is in the God Complex, what the Beast really is in the Satan two-parter, although that one, as you can imagine, is a bit more explicit, but still, you get the point. These stories leave certain things up to interpretation. They don't have to rely on it in order for you to get anything out of them. Depending on anyone's interpretation, this episode could be a fucking 1 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. Because Russell was too lazy and misguided to give this ending a redraft, and this story basically laughs at you from the start for thinking that its folklore explanation would have been a good idea. Well, fuck you, because why does the Doctor fucking breaking a string start all of this stupid bullshit? You can't possibly think that this is a good ending. How could you not see how this undermines everything in the story? Even the character development for Ruby, finally, doesn't matter in the end, because it's an alternate timeline that no one remembers. It's just a waste of everything. You can't, oh my fucking god, why? TLDR. Being left up to interpretation is fine, if not brilliant in the right context. Relying on interpretation to cover up your own holes is lazy as fuck, and you should be ashamed of yourself. So, that was 69 yards, and when I said this was the most botched good episode of Doctor Who in a long time, really I meant it was the most botched good episode since The Giggle. But that doesn't exactly excuse how truly awful this episode ends up being because of its ending. While this episode is genuinely great, besides a few warts for the first like half an hour or so, even not factoring in this story's stupid resolution, it starts to fall apart when the Gwilliam subplot starts. Like honestly, it's really hard to talk about anything noteworthy in the conclusion here, because none of it ends up mattering because none of it actually happened. It bears no weight on Ruby's conscience, all of her character development, and all the time we spent exploring her fear of abandonment doesn't matter, because it didn't actually happen. And the story itself, and anything to like about it, doesn't end up meaning anything, because this stupid bollocks ending just tells you it doesn't matter and you should draw up your own conclusion. The whole mystery being built up through the whole story is fascinating, until it's not. Ruby's character starts becoming great, until she isn't. Again, the only noteworthy bits of praise to give this episode is that it's shot and directed beautifully, but ultimately, because of this episode's awful writing, in the end, this episode is just a waste of time, which I wouldn't even bother ever watching again, because why would I waste my time getting invested in this story and the characters and the mystery if I know that in the long run, it doesn't matter, it means nothing, and Russell basically got lazy, gave up, and decided you have to draw your own conclusion for everything. Fucking shameful.
Hey, at least I gave with MILF Ruby though.
Anyway, I started.
Sing bean.
Up next is Dot and Bubble, an episode that I actually do like. No, I'm serious this time, I actually like this one. My poor dog is so confused. They try a social experiment on the woman by having Carla's... Bleh. Why does it say Carla's? It's... Autocorrect be like... I don't know English.